We're going to do another little Bible study, going through a couple pieces of scripture, emphasizing a very, very well-known passage that is read at most weddings, emphasizing its importance. But we're going to start with something. I've mentioned a few times how this verse that I have up here, or this sentence from F. Scott Fitzgerald, has been up since pre-COVID. It's been up there for about 3 years. I wrote it several years ago because everyone that I know, I wanted to memorize this, okay, at least understand the concept. What does he say? The test of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and retain the ability to function. That means to not be driven crazy by what Krishna calls apparent opposing dualities. We're living in a world of good and bad and tall and short and left and right and Democrats and Republicans, and like all our issues have these different sides. Are we able to live in a world where there's life and death and have it make sense, okay? And that's the first-rate intelligence, and for me it's a challenge to get people, including myself, to stay in that mindset, to be more inclusive, to not always insist it's my way instead of your way, and I need to be right and you're wrong and things like that. And sometimes it's the reverse. I'm wrong, there's something wrong with me, and you're good. You know, people do that too. That leads to insecurities. But to live in a state in which we see both sides and we can operate is what that quote's about. Now, I've had it up there for 3 years. This is a dry erase board. Look what happens when I try to erase it. Okay, so it's permanently imprinted on my board. Okay, I'll probably use some squirty stuff to get rid of it later, okay? But I think that's a sign, right? We should have that imprinted in our minds and our hearts. Next week, if it's gone, it's because I figured out the solution to get rid of it. But please try to remember that. Very valuable, and most people fancy themselves as smart, right? If you're going to be a spiritual person and you want to be first-rate intelligence, we have to hold opposing ideas in mind and still retain the ability to function. And that means being able to operate in a system in which we can disagree with people and yet still love them. That's how we function, okay? So what I'm going to replace it with, effective next week, if I can figure out how to get it off there, is this line. Recognition and liberation are simultaneous. That'll be my new thing for a while. I got that from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Now, I researched it to find the exact wording in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I couldn't find it. I've experienced this a few times before, in which I have something that I've been saying a lot, and I think I'm quoting it exactly, and then I can't find it. And then it occurred to me, because I'm about to read something about this, it doesn't matter who said it. I'm pretty confident that it's from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I know the concept is, but these exact words I couldn't find precisely, but the concept is there. Recognition and liberation are simultaneous. That means recognizing truth and liberating yourself from the false self, ultimately the ego, the devil, and all the illusion of this world, is a instantaneous experience. And every time you get a little blip of it, we often get a chill, an insight or revelation. You'll have a moment of the liberation, but it's just for a moment because we got a lot of conditioning that we're buried under. But we're going to emphasize this a lot moving forward. And I don't care who said it, because we've all got truth. We've all got the ability to understand these truths. I don't think too many of the prophets were too worried about who said what. It's one reason why Muhammad didn't want his image shown anywhere, and he didn't try to take credit for the Quran. He said he just received it. Most prophets are talking about receiving information. Jesus says, I've done nothing but God talking to me, okay? And that's all of us. And so I'm going to read for you a book. We're going to do a little bit of this over time from my good friend from Canada, Nicholas. And it's called The Way of Dying. It's an excellent book. We're going to be reading a little bit and doing a little bit in group over time, but I'm just going to read some of the preface for you today and set us up for what the scripture is that we're going to talk about. And it starts with recognizing it doesn't matter who says truth. We all have access to it. So this Nicholas wrote this book, but he says he didn't write this book. He says, I do not subscribe to the belief in the originality of thoughts, nor in the ability of any one mind to claim responsibility for them. See, he's recognizing that all wisdom, all truth, all teachings are universal, and we all have access to them. Whatever words you want to use to explain truth works, that's fine. And no one person is better than anybody else because they might have figured it out first. That's like the first person that figured out 1 + 1 = 2. Do we know his name? Who or her? Do we know that person? Who cares? Can we all apply 1 + 1 = 2? Yes. Well, that's true with language, and it's true with wisdom. So I got Nicholas is right. Whoever comes up with truth is truth, okay? And then he goes on, as such, these words are not my own, but the accumulated truth of what I have witnessed as filtered through my experience. That's perfect, okay? His experience, seeing this world and operating within it, and then coming across a lot of different teachings. And for him, what he wrote in this book is just his experience of processing the truth that he saw or has seen. Inspiration is something that happens to us. Ideas possess us. We are but imperfect vessels into which heavenly bodies pour themselves. Again, that's perfect. We're supposed to access these heavenly bodies. It's our higher self. The Tao says, can you bring the Tao to earth, right? Bring your higher self into this body. It'll carry all the wisdom with it. They occupy us for a time and, doing so, propel the course of history according to their whim. Abstract notions of love, happiness, and freedom have shaped human experience more than any force of nature. I have watched us split the world asunder on the altars of politics and religion. That's a spectacular line, okay? Politics and religion, extremely divisive. So many people dig their feet in the sand and say, this is how it is. They're not doing first-rate intelligence because they're insisting on just their side and not looking at the other side. He's so right. He says the answer to every divide is a simple one. I say it plainly so there can be no confusion. Only love can save the world. Okay? Only love can save the world. Now, it's called The Way of Dying. Again, we'll do more of it as we move along. But we're going to emphasize that. Love today, exactly what it is, how to conceptualize it, how it saves the world. And it's what we need to be focusing on, okay? Let's go through a couple pieces of scripture. Genesis 1:27 says, God created man how? In his image, okay? God created man in his image, which means we are like God, okay? Why we make God a guy sitting in a throne in the sky, that's putting God in our image, okay? God made us in his image, which makes us like God. And again, the word his, we could talk about some other time. It doesn't mean masculine. It does in a way, but not in a gender way, okay? God created man in his image, and in 1 John 4:8, it says God is love. Well, if we were made in God's image and God is love, what does that make us? Love, right? Very simply. We are love packaged in these meat suits for a while, okay? We are love, and that is very clearly what we are. And every time we step out of that flow, which is the Tao, which in the way of dying, the Tao is the way in Chinese, that's what it means. The way or the path is love. Well, the dying, like Nicholas would talk about here, the dying is ultimately our process of dying to the ego, dying to the self, dying to our false illusions, dying to our clinging, dying to our attachments, right? Letting it go. That's what we'll have to do. We have to let go of our bodies, we know that. Well, how about letting go of your assumptions and your judgments and fear and shame and all of that? That's all dying. The ego calls it dying because the ego is trying to cling to all of that, okay? So God made us like him. He is love, which makes us love, period. You're not the physical being you think you are. You're a love being who's temporarily physical, okay? So I have this little drawing. Good way to illustrate again. Here we are in the land of labels, because that's what these bodies are. All these labels that we think we are, that we become addicted to. And this is the gender and the religion and the sexual orientation and political affiliation, and all the tall and short and weight and addict and not addict and every label you could possibly think of. Go Steelers, beat the Browns. I shouldn't have said that, but hey, there we are. Okay. It is what it is, but I recognize what that is. It's just a label. If I was born in Cleveland, I might feel differently about the teams, but whatever. They're labels. And I was born American, and I'm a dad, so that gives me, context of my little physical world experience, but they're just labels. It's not what I am. I was made in God's image, and God is love. So we have some sort of barrier. It's a good way to think of it. When I was younger, I once remember telling my wife, I felt like this film sort of around me. I didn't even know what I was saying, but like some sort of energy that was like right here. And I felt like I was stuck in it. And all these years later, I'm like, yeah, that was the ego aura, which I still have sometimes. I can feel it. It's like it's pushing people away somehow. Like I'm different than you. And it would be right here. And I don't like it. It's like I'm wrapped in cellophane sometimes. I don't like that. So anyhow, there's a barrier of some sort. And then the land of love, which is what we are. This is the false self or the lower self or, this place that we're at. But there's this another place that we're seeking or trying to figure out. It's enlightenment, right? It's awakening. It's born again and all of that. It's also home. And this process is known as dying. going from this to that. We know physically that's the case. If you visualize yourself as a spirit or a soul, we know this goes away, okay? Well, what else has to die? All these labels. Whatever it is you define yourself as, or others have defined you as, either way, eventually that has to go. If you don't define yourself as what you are, love, that's all you are, then we're going to have arguments, we're going to have debates, we're going to have suffering. This is Buddha's Four Noble Truths. We suffer because we're attached to these labels, okay? We're also attached to other people's labels and the labels they give us and blah, blah, blah. Guess what? We're all love. There is no differentiation. Everybody has to come to that awareness. That's unity. And that's what all the prophets taught. And it's what all the spiritual teachings are about. Somehow we have taken spiritual teachings and we've dumped it into the land of labels, and we try to teach people what they are using the false self. That's actually the devil, okay? Tricking us, deceiving us into thinking it's about all these behaviors. And meanwhile, the prophets are extremely clear, and some of these teachings are extremely clear. First of all, God is love. I mean, come on. It doesn't say God is a man, not like Jesus. That's not what I'm talking about. Is that this ultimate being that we're aspiring towards isn't the flesh, okay? Very specific what love is, and we're going to go through that. The teachings are always very clear. It's us that screw it up because we think we're these physical beings, and the labels mess us up, okay? So we're going to go through what I call the litmus test for love, okay? Which is 1 Corinthians 13. This is read at weddings all the time. Sometimes the entire passage is read. Almost always the last line is read, in various portions in between. But most people, like me, for many weddings that I went to when I was younger, you gloss over the beginning stuff, okay? And we always focus on the end, which we will certainly do here today. But I'm going to go through some of the most important parts of this long passage.